Queen Victoria, very good man, tra-la-la-bum-dee-ay. That song is what we traditionally sing in my dad's family when we bring the flaming Christmas pudding to the dinner table at Christmas dinner. It's surprisingly imperialist for my dad's mostly Irish Catholic family, so I can only assume that this particular tradition comes from the English side of the family. But why are we singing imperialist songs while we serve the Christmas pudding? And what other folk traditions are there associated with this delicious Christmas item? Hi, and welcome to what will hopefully be a new occasional series on my channel, Food and Folklore, starting today with Christmas pudding. What I'm going to do is basically make a recipe, and while you watch me make it, I am going to talk about the history of Christmas pudding, but also our folklore and traditions around Christmas pudding. The recipe I'm going to be making is actually a recipe for using up leftover Christmas pudding. This is also an important part of British traditions because Christmas pudding is made with dried fruit, it's soaked and steamed, often with alcohol as well, keeps for a really long time, and it's something usually made in relatively large quantities. So there are actually genuinely folk traditions around the using up of the leftovers as well as the making and eating of it at Christmas. For example, Thomas Thistleton Dyer in his 1875 book British Popular Customs reported an old story from Shropshire about the origin of simnel cakes, which is another traditional item made on Mid-Lent Sunday or Mothering Sunday. And according to this Shropshire story, part of the origin of the simnel cakes was using up leftovers, including leftover Christmas pudding, which you would not otherwise be able to eat during the fasting season of Lent, apart from on that Mid-Lent Sunday. I am making a recipe from the National Trust Book of Scones, or scones. Argue that out in the comments. This is a recipe for Christmas pudding scones. I have been wanting to try this out for absolutely ages. National Trust scones are the best. If you want to try making scones at home, get yourself a National Trust scones recipe, or if you can get to a National Trust site, go to the cafe and try the scones because National Trust scones are second to none and they have an enormous variety, hence the entire book of scones. So I'm going to try out this Christmas pudding scone recipe while I talk to you about folklore and traditions and history around Christmas pudding. Because I am filming this in November, I have cheated and I have bought myself a microwavable Christmas pudding from Tesco's. I'm the only person in my house who likes Christmas pudding, so this is just more sensible, practical, and economical for me to use to try out this recipe. But if you are interested in historical recipes for Christmas pudding itself, I have a couple of recommendations. If you want to go really far back, there is a recipe for figgy, which is the origin of figgy pudding, plum pudding, Christmas pudding. This recipe is from the Form of Curry. This was a cookbook put together by the master cooks of King Richard II. It is the oldest English cookery book in existence. The collection dates to about 1390. And number 89 is the recipe for figgy. It's fairly straightforward. It says, take blanched almonds, grind them and draw them up with water and wine, quartered figs and whole raisins. Cast thereto powdered ginger and clarified honey. Seethe it well and salt it and serve forth. You can get hold of a copy of The Form of Curry from Amazon. Or if you would like something a little bit more recent than 1390, Max Miller has done an episode on Christmas pudding. I will link to his YouTube episode below, but you can also buy his book, Tasting History. I thoroughly recommend both his channel and his book. Max Miller is one of my favorite history creators on YouTube. I think he's absolutely brilliant. And in his book, he has a recipe for Christmas pudding where he's broken it down with modern measurements and modern instructions. It comes from Eliza Acton, Modern Cookery for Private Families, which is an English Victorian recipe. And of course, the Victorian era is the era where Christmas pudding really comes into its own as a Christmas tradition. So I would definitely recommend that if you want to try out a traditional Christmas pudding recipe. Meantime, I am gonna do my cheat thing and microwave my little Tesco pudding so that I can make the scones with it. Now, one of the folk traditions around Christmas pudding is to make it with a sixpence inside it. So one lucky person finds the sixpence while eating it at Christmas dinner. However, you cannot do that if you are microwaving it. The microwave will explode. And this is my husband's fancy new microwave. So I don't think he would be very impressed. So I'm afraid I cannot do the tradition of putting a sixpence in the Christmas pudding. But if you're making a recipe with leftovers, I think it's safe to say that somebody would have nabbed the sixpence already when they were eating it at dinner.
The idea of putting a sixpence in the Christmas pudding seems to have come from Twelfth Night celebrations, a subject we will return to shortly. As you can tell from the recipe from the form of curry, plum pudding or figgy pudding does not necessarily have to include plums or figs, but is a general term for a dried fruit pudding. Modern recipes vary quite a bit, but usually include quite a few currants and sultanas.
Oops, that was too much sugar. Never mind. I don't think most recipes suffer from having too much sugar in them. So the recipe calls for mixed spice. It doesn't really specify what type of mixed spice. I'm assuming not, herbe de Provence or Creole chicken seasoning, which is what we usually use. So when I was at the supermarket, I picked up mulled wine spice. I figured that would be the right sort of thing for Christmas pudding scones. It says it includes allspice, whatever that is, dried orange peel, cinnamon, brackets cassia, ground cloves and nutmeg. So that's what I'm going with. This is meant to be put in a pot of mulled wine, not in a scone, so it comes in like tea bags. I don't think this is gonna work. I think maybe I should just put some cinnamon in it. It suggests sprinkling cinnamon on the top anyway. Yeah, let's just go with cinnamon. A little bit of extra cinnamon never hurt anyone either. As you can see, my approach to cooking is a bit chaotic. That's why I'm not doing this as an instructional video. I definitely leave that to Max Miller. Also, this isn't my recipe. It belongs to the National Trust, so I'm not gonna lay out all the steps or give instructions or anything. Nobody should follow my instructions on how to cook anything.
In his book, Thomas Thistleton Dyer noted that pudding used to mean stuffing or meat, like black pudding, whereas what was by then known as pudding used to be called porridge. So earlier references to plum porridge or plum pottage should be read as referring to plum pudding. In earlier centuries, the pudding was not exclusively associated with Christmas. The Roman Catholic and Church of England church calendars end their year the Sunday before Advent, and the season of Advent in December is the start of the church's new year. Advent, which covers the 4 Sundays up to Christmas Day and therefore broadly covers December, is like Lent. It is a season of fasting and preparation, or at least it is supposed to be. Because Advent is a season of fasting, it is traditional to celebrate Christmas with a big feast at the end of that season of fasting, including meat, alcohol, and of course desserts.
I'm about to get my hands in this and I'm way too hot in this Christmas jumper, so I'm gonna take it off. But I've still got the Christmas earrings on.
Plum porridge or plum pudding were often served at feasts and dinners, including at Christmas. British naval chaplain Henry Tiong mentioned having plum puddings as part of Christmas dinner on board ship on Christmas Day 1675, for example. Plum pottage or porridge was developed into a more solid pudding recipe during the 1700s, when it started to be cooked in a pot inside skin or cloth. It was also during the 1700s that it started to be particularly associated with Christmas. By 1790, Christmas pudding had become enough of a tradition that, according to a gentleman's magazine from that year, at Ripon, in Yorkshire, on Christmas Eve, the grocers sent each of their customers a pound or half of currants and raisins to make a Christmas pudding. By the Victorian era, the two were becoming inseparable. In 1843, Charles Dickens published the book that has dominated and enshrined British Christmas traditions ever since, A Christmas Carol. Early on, Ebenezer Scrooge's extremely miserable attitude towards Christmas is established when he tells his nephew, "If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart." Later, when Scrooge meets the ghost of Christmas Present, the ghost is surrounded by Christmas foods like meat, mince pies and sausages, and this includes plum puddings. When the ghost takes Scrooge to see the Cratchits, their lower middle-class Christmas dinner is described, including the pudding. While Mrs. Cratchit is cooking, the children listen to hear the pudding singing in its copper pot. In 1845, Eliza Acton included a recipe for Christmas pudding in her cookbook Modern Cookery for Private Families, and in 1847, plum pudding had become central enough to the Christmas feast that a farmer described treating all his labourers to a dinner of goose and plum pudding with cider as usual. In 1850, the London Illustrated News said, "The plum pudding is a national symbol. It does not represent a class or caste, but the bulk of the English nation. There is not a man, woman or child raised above what the French would call prolétaire that does not expect a taste of plum pudding of some sort or another on Christmas Day. As the 19th century went on, Christmas pudding became one of the staple images on the newly popular Christmas cards, along with Christmas trees, Father Christmas, and so on, and its place at the heart of British Christmas celebrations was secured.
While I stir in the Christmas pudding, a few words about Stir Up Sunday. This got its name from a bit of a coincidence. The last Sunday before Advent, first Sunday of Advent is the first Sunday of, not Christmas, because that starts on Christmas Day, but the season leading up to Christmas. The last Sunday before Advent involves the phrase stir up in the collect, which is a prayer that in Church of England church services everybody says together during the service on that Sunday. You would also be making Christmas pudding around that time because Christmas pudding keeps very well. It's something you can make in advance of the festivities so that you can get ahead of yourself a little bit. So the coincidence of the translation of the Latin being stir up and the fact that you'd be making Christmas pudding around that time led to a tradition of making the Christmas pudding on that Sunday, and in some cases stirring in a sixpence as well. The translation comes from the 1549 Book of Common Prayer. It translates the Roman Missal's Latin, excita or excita, quaesimus Domine, stir up, we beseech thee, O Lord. That's the English translation of the Latin excita, which means like to excite. That's where we get the English word excite from, but stir up is a sensible enough translation of it. And in the Book of Common Prayer, this collect that everybody would say on that Sunday was, stir up, we beseech thee, O Lord, the wills of thy faithful people, that they, plenteously bringing forth the fruit of good works, may of thee be plenteously rewarded through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Everybody would be saying that prayer on that Sunday. In his 1875 book, British Popular Customs, Thistleton Dyer says, stir up Sunday, the 26th Sunday after Trinity, now it's actually the 25th. Typing error on his part, I guess. Writing error on his part? Anyway, is called by the schoolboys Stir Up Sunday from the collect used on that day. And they repeat the following lines without considering their irreverent application. Stir up, we beseech thee, the pudding in the pot, and when we get home, we'll eat it all hot. I'm glad to see that the tradition of rewriting Christmas prayers goes back quite a long way. When I was growing up, there's a hymn, a Christmas carol that we sing early on in Advent about the angel Gabriel, which is the angel Gabriel from heaven came. His wings as drifted snow, his eyes as flame. All hail, said he, thou lowly maiden Mary, most highly favoured Lady Gloria. Well, as kids, we used to sing, most highly flavoured gravy, oxo. So I'm very glad that changing the words of prayers and hymns to be something food-related has a long tradition.
The Christmas season itself in the Anglican and indeed Roman Catholic churches is the 12 days of Christmas, which starts with Christmas Day on the 25th of December and ends with the Feast of the Epiphany, the 12th night, on the 6th of January. This celebrates the visit of the Magi, Persian priests, later known as wise men or even and inaccurately kings, to the baby Jesus. During the medieval and early modern periods, one tradition on Twelfth Night was to choose a king and queen of the night who would rule over the party, and they would be chosen by finding something that had been hidden in the cake: beans, peas, coins, thimbles, rings, and so on. As Christmas Day itself got bigger and Twelfth Night smaller in the 19th century, the coins started to be put in the Christmas pudding instead, hence the lucky sixpence that ended up getting put into the mixture on Stir Up Sunday. Another tradition around Stir Up Sunday was that every member of the family would take a turn stirring the mixture and make a wish for the following year. One older woman from Surrey remembered in the 1990s that when she was a child, the tradition was that if you could get the wooden spoon to stand up in the mixture, your wish would be granted. Whoever found the sixpence in their portion on Christmas Day would, of course, be in for some good luck.
I'm really bad at working with dough. So sticky, it gets stuck to all my fingers. I'm not very good at it. I used to make scones a lot as a teenager. I had a scone making obsession. But I've never been very good at working with any kind of bread dough because they're so sticky.
There are a few rhymes and songs about plum puddings in general and about Christmas pudding, like this one from an 1894 book of nursery rhymes. Plum pudding hot, plum pudding cold, plum pudding in the pot 9 days old. Some like it hot, some like it cold, some like it in the pot 9 days old.
It says to use a 7 centimetre round cake cutter, but I can't be bothered to measure it. So I'm just going to kind of guess. But also I have these lovely crinkly ones, which is quite a traditional shape for scones. I don't know that I want them that flat and wide. I've probably made them too flat anyway. I'm going with this one.
Although plum pudding may not have become particularly associated with Christmas until the 18th century, thanks to the fact figgy pudding and plum pudding or porridge were always an option for Christmas dinner, there was a 16th century Christmas song about it, which of course we still sing today. It's the well-known Christmas carol, We Wish You a Merry Christmas, and the famous verse, now bring us some figgy pudding, now bring us some figgy pudding, now bring us some figgy pudding, and bring some out here. This comes from an old tradition of going around the houses singing songs for the festival and demanding cakes in return, which in some parts of the country was also done on All Souls' Day on the 2nd of November, when soul cakes, often oat cakes, were demanded. On Norfolk farms, it used to be traditional to serve all the animals on the farm a bit of the plum pudding before sitting down to eat, to ensure good luck for the following year. To serve Christmas pudding, traditionally, you pour brandy all over it and then set it on fire. You turn out all the lights and carry it to the table. Christmas dinner is generally eaten while all sitting around a big table, and usually if there are too many of you to fit round the table, you go out to somewhere with a bigger table. Dickens describes this tradition in A Christmas Carol, so it was clearly well established by 1843. Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. This is where, in my dad's family, we sing our song about Queen Victoria. I haven't yet found anyone else with a tradition of singing my dad's family's song while bringing out the Christmas pudding, though I did manage to trace its probable origins. Tra-ra-ra Boom-de-ay was an American vaudeville song from the 1880s that became popular in London music halls when sung by Lottie Collins in 1892. My great-grandmother Elizabeth Davy was born in London in 1883 and grew up there, so that bit was probably incorporated from the music halls. The first bit of the song, Queen Victoria Very Good Man, is a line from a marching song sung by the 88th Carnatic Infantry, a regiment of the British Indian Army. It was recorded in the 1960s by Robert Graves, author of my beloved I, Claudius, on which see my video about House of the Dragon and the history behind it. Our great-great-grandfather Joseph Davy spent time in India in the 1870s while serving as a private in the British Army. So he must have heard it while he was out there. He wasn't British Indian Army, he was British Army, but he must have heard it from some of the other soldiers, presumably. Although this isn't the branch of the family that was from Warwickshire and his wife Delia Tully was Irish, Joseph Davy was born and raised in London. So this is indeed one of the small number of English branches of our ancestors.
I'm sitting at the toddler table because I can't be bothered getting the big table out. Christmas pudding would normally be served with brandy butter. And at home, as in my parents' home, when we're making Christmas dinner, that is my job. Because as you have seen, I'm not great in the kitchen. So cooking Christmas dinner is usually my dad and my brother's job. And I am responsible for making brandy butter. And when I say making brandy butter, I mean taking butter and pouring brandy into it and some sugar. That's making brandy butter. But right now, it is lunchtime. It is the 13th of November, and I have work to do. So rather than serving this with brandy butter, as I would if we were a bit closer to Christmas, I am just going to eat it with regular butter. There's a little cross-section for you. It's still steaming. Time to give it a taste. That is delicious. It's a scone, it's Christmas pudding, it's butter. The only thing that would make this better is if I had actually spread brandy butter on it instead of regular butter. So I think I might make these again nearer to Christmas. I was going to say I could get the toddler to help me. That's probably not appropriate considering the amount of brandy involved. But I'm sure I can find time to make these again a little bit closer to Christmas. The trouble is I need some more people to eat them. My mum can't eat gluten or dairy, which rules these out. And my husband and my son don't like Christmas pudding. So I guess I'm going to be eating a lot of scones. If you enjoyed this video and you fancy reading some spooky ghost stories for Christmas, consider buying my book, Creepy Classics Ghost Stories from Ancient Rome. 13 ancient Roman ghost stories retold, available from Amazon now. Good job.